Welcome to 6 Feet in the Six, the show where we share ideas and best practices in commercial real estate. Joining us today is Ryan Anderson, Vice President of Global Research and Insights at Herman Miller. Ryan, thank you for joining us today.
Jeff, thanks for having me. It's good to see you.
Can you tell the viewers a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. I have the privilege of leading the Global Research and Insights team at Herman Miller, which is basically, it's kind of two functions and two sub-teams. There's a group that does the research, the insight generation on a variety of topics around the world. And there's also a group whose sole responsibility is sharing insights globally. So I get the privilege of bouncing between the two activities. I enjoy both. It keeps my curiosity piqued. But ultimately, it's our goal to try to be the most helpful, relevant source of insight about how to create great places. And I've been in the industry a long time, 27 years. This is the most fun I've ever had in a role. So I'm thankful for it.
What do you like the most and least about your home office setup?
Oh, well, I've worked for many years actually to try to create what I think is an optimal work from home setup. I have worked in what we now call hybrid for a really long time, since about 2014. And so I'm constantly experimenting. And there's a variety of things that I've done here that I love. The most basic principle, I think, for anybody who's on video a lot is to make sure that any chaos happening is happening in front of you. So I think the fact that I have this consistent background, I update the pictures and the plants probably once every month, just because I get bored of looking at it, provides me like this sense of I know how I'm seen. But what I've been most enjoying is experimentations around what's called biophilic design, or basically ways of bringing the outdoors in. So I've got a CO2 monitor, which I got for $40 online, measuring air quality. If your CO2 levels spike, your cognition can actually go down. So I say that it's helping to keep me smarter. I've got a light bulb that changes. I can actually manually change it to be different color temperatures and intensity along with the sun, something known as circadian cycle. And I've got not one, but a couple aquariums in the space, which I love. And I'm not going to be doing it today, but on those really long Zoom meetings where there's lots of people talking, instead of staring at the screen, I love just staring beyond the screen a little bit and soaking that in. That little touch of the outdoors for me is really, really important. So those are the things I love about it the most. What I like about it the least is that I have yet to really get temperature regulation in this room down. You probably know that for years, the International Facilities Management Association did this survey, and number one and number two complaints in the office were almost always the same, but inverted. It's either too hot or too cold. That's kind of my complaint about my home office. I'm at this kind of extreme end of the house above the garage, and being in Grand Rapids, Michigan, it gets cold above the garage in the middle of January, but in the middle of July, it can be kind of warm. So it's another excuse for me, though, to not just work here. Like I work a lot from this room, and I'm fortunate to have a dedicated room. But I view my house as like a series of places where I can go do work. So when it gets really hot or really cold, I go somewhere else.
Ryan, in a new segment on the show, we take a deep dive on our guest LinkedIn account and look for posts that need more context. So I've noticed that Herman Miller has started a podcast that you're the host of, and I've seen a couple of your posts lately. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about the podcast and some of the guests you're having on, and what does the future of it look like?
I will, but first I got to give you like this shout out. You got this Sean Evans Hot Ones thing going. I don't know if you've seen the show Hot Ones on YouTube. It's one of my all-time favorite YouTube shows, but they always do this thing called, exploring your Instagram. So I love that you're doing exploring this LinkedIn.
I have no idea what that show is. I did not copy.
You've got to see it. You're going to love it. And you're doing a phenomenal job hosting this. And I think you're going to get some more inspiration from Sean Evans. But I'd love to tell you about it. And by the way, I'll say that I would love it if any of our listeners or viewers would connect with me on LinkedIn. Herman Miller shares a lot of insights through our website, particularly through our Future of Work hub on our website. But personally, I try to be out there every day, at least for a little while, getting into the nitty gritty of this topic or that. It's a good venue for actually kind of working through some of this stuff, because we feel like we've got really good information on some topics. There's other things that we're all working through, and LinkedIn's a great place to do it. So, the podcast was a result of a couple different things. When the pandemic lockdown started to happen, we had this view of where future of work and workplace was going before the pandemic. And we wanted to begin to do more research to try to either validate or invalidate some of our assumptions. And it didn't make sense to go do some huge survey. We needed to get into the nitty gritty. So I started what we called our listening tour, which was lots of conversations. I mean, in a 6-month period, I think I had over 200 conversations with about 85 different organizations. What they told me in November was very different than what I heard in February because things were evolving. And over time, one of the patterns that we detected the most, not surprisingly, is that people wanted to hear what others were doing. They wanted to hear from voices that maybe had thought through this stuff for longer periods of time. So we conceptualized this idea of looking forward because we do have this very optimistic view of where things are going. And we also heard from a lot of organizations that they had formed some sort of committee, whether it was formalized or ad hoc. It might have been head of corporate real estate, workplace strategy, legal, HR, IT, because they were working through more than just office related considerations. It was really around flexible working, hybrid, what feels appropriate, what doesn't. And we thought, we've met some really, really insightful people along the way. Let's create a delivery mechanism to get these voices to those committees. So broad audience, but a specific use case. But really anyone who wants to think more about the various facets of the future of work, including the built environment, I think would benefit from it. We're on episode 3 or 4 right now, and I'm having a ball. It's fun to be host, to be able to do what you're doing a little bit. I've taken inspiration from what you've done.
Well, thank you. I've seen the episodes so far and I think they're great. And I was joking, I've seen every single episode of Hot Ones.
Okay, good.
You'll notice a lot of similarities of what I'm doing.
That's brilliant. I will confess that I also try to channel Sean Evans a little bit. It's a wonderful format.
What was the last year of business like for you?
Well, it was exciting in both a good and a bad way. I mean, we were concerned with all of the various pandemic related considerations for our own business and the people we serve as well. But there was an element of excitement on a couple different levels. The main thing was that we had a vision for where we thought work was going that originated a long time ago. We were thinking about distributed working, which is just like the spreading out of work, whether that's across a floor plan or a city or the world, and how to support it and how to reimagine and kind of reconceptualize offices with this lens of being more on demand. And we had a lot of optimism and hope around that future because if I'm being really blunt, offices weren't necessarily thriving in the pre-pandemic era. You know, occupancy rates were low. The work had spread out, but that reimagining of space hadn't always happened. And so we probably by June or July of 2020 had come together and said, all right, what appears to be happening as a result of the pandemic is more accelerative than divergent. Like we think where things were going is still where it's going, but it's happening faster. And we tested that. And probably by August or September, we felt confident that that's what was happening. And there were a lot of things we had been working on, some of it around research and insight sharing, other things like making, Aeron chairs available to the employees of our corporate customers, thinking about different product packaging. I mean, a whole variety of initiatives to basically support work wherever it happened. And so we just put our foot on the accelerator. As a business, in addition to supplying product for office spaces, of course, we also work within healthcare and residential home settings. And so we saw lots of different growth opportunities. Our retail and consumer expansion was really significant. A lot of people had significant changes in the way they lived during the pandemic. Multi-generational households were already at a high in North America, but they got even higher. People started reinvesting in their homes in new ways, not just work from home. It just represented like this broad spectrum of opportunity that we took advantage of. And we really said, now's the time for us to shine and for us to live out where we thought, things might be going. I would also be remiss if I didn't mention a significant coming together with arguably our best competitor, Knoll, to create the parent brand of Miller Knoll. We've had such a tremendous respect and appreciation for what they've done over the years that the opportunity to come together was too good to pass up. And so we're super optimistic, hence the name of the podcast, looking forward to how things are going to unravel, not just for us, but really for the people we serve in the coming years.
What are some of the current initiatives your firm is working
Well, there's a variety of things. Most of them represent an extension of what I talked about before, which is trying to basically look at the most critical activities that people are engaged in around the world and help create better spaces to support them. A lot of that's around workplace. Some of it's beyond. We've got a very ambitious research project right now. I'm not quite ready to share the results on it yet, but it's been looking at the future of homes and home life around the world, because the ways that we were quarantined and isolated in our homes the last year changed our perception of home. By the way, I think it actually changed our perception of many of the environments that we have used in the past: office, schools, clinical healthcare facilities, et cetera. And we're just beginning to really understand that. So from a research standpoint, we continue to dive deeper and deeper on future of work and how to support more distributed hybrid teams, but we're also doing this other research in other areas. One thing I'll highlight is we've really dialed up the insight sharing. As I mentioned before, our goal is relevance. Like, we want to be helpful. We want to answer the questions that people have. So we've got this body of research, but we're also probably every 3 to 4 months updating basically our point of view. We've got this body of research, but a point of view is just our way of saying, we know that you've got these top of mind questions, so here's the best information we can provide to you. Not in a prescriptive way, but most of that over the last year has been on future of work and workplace. And we continue to think about how to share more information. You mentioned the podcast. I think I mentioned the Future of Hub page on our website. There's also webinars every other week. We've had more than 14,000 people tune into our webinars since the pandemic started, and a variety of other ways that we're out there. But we want to simultaneously continue to learn, but really make sure that we're making those insights consumable, readily available for anybody who's trying to make a decision about their office or their home or anywhere in between.
What do you hope the future of the workplace looks like?
Well, I think I'm more concerned about what it feels like, which I know I'm like picking at that word a little bit. I think there's some things on the horizon that the evidence suggests are in fact going to happen. We're going to see more flexibility in terms of how employers enable their people to work. We are a founding member of a group called Future Forum, which is a collaboration between Slack, Boston Consulting Group, Fortune, Herman Miller, and others. And some of our recent joint research together was really interesting. It showed that 76% of people want more flexibility with where they could work, but 93% wanted more flexibility with when they could work. So it's not that they don't ever want to come to the office again. In fact, a majority of them are enthusiastic to come to the office, but more on their terms, having more flexibility, whether you're a care provider or whether you're just somebody who's got a busy life. And so I think when I think of workplace, I think of it as a series of places to include home workspaces, office spaces, co-working, flexible workspace, and beyond. But specific to offices, I'm optimistic that we're going to see a new life, like a rebirth of sorts for what offices could be. They were so generic, and I know this is not true of all, but just thinking broadly across the globe, so dominated by individual desks that had lower and lower utilization rates for the 10 years previous to the pandemic, based on all of our sensor data. They weren't really necessarily heading in the right direction. And so all of those different opportunities, whether it's activity-based working or neighborhood-based planning or biophilic design, inclusive design, I don't want to get into all the specific trends, but all of these different strategies that can make workplaces much more attractive and enjoyable didn't always get to take root because the plans were so desk dominated and they were planned in such a generic way that I think now that the office is in essence in competition with other spaces and needs to find its role as a complementary space to these others, we can begin to go look at those best practices and create very enjoyable spaces. I think it's an overstatement to say that offices will be where group socialization happens and home will be where individual space happens. I don't think that's true, but I do hope they feel very community and collegial, like the place to go to be with your people, a place that promotes belonging, and a tight connection with the organization that you work in or you work at. So I think that's where things are headed. I think there were some really good examples of it before the pandemic. I think we've seen such a major tipping point that that's what's on the horizon. I don't subscribe at all to the belief that the office is dead, because as I mentioned, a majority of people still want it. I just think it has to get a lot better, and that's a good thing.
What do you think needs to change with technology to make this distributed workforce a little more easier for organizations to embrace?
Fantastic question. There's a couple different things. First, I want to talk about functionally within an organization, the role of IT. Before I get to the specific technologies, we were seeing IT becoming more and more involved with corporate real estate as the world of prop tech, or technologies related to property, sometimes known as CRE tech, corporate real estate tech as a subset. As that got more innovative and it gained more traction, we saw more IT people starting to talk to their real estate folks about things like sensors in the environment, things like software platforms to manage space better. But what was interesting with the beginning of the pandemic is that most IT organizations that had some sort of digital transformation plan for the way work would happen got completely sucked into that. Like they were planning a Zoom rollout or a Teams rollout, and they saw their users massively adopt these other things. And it kind of pulled them away by and large, based on the conversations we've had, from thinking about the built environment. But now it's time to revisit that. I like to think about any sort of office space as a more consumer driven, on demand sort of environment. And so we need to think about supporting experiences like what consumers have elsewhere. My favorite analogy is restaurants. When it was in October of 2020 and organizations were beginning to think that remote work was possible, and they'd start to say, do you think we'll still need offices? I'd say, well, do you think we'll still need restaurants? Because we've been cooking at home for the last 8 months and we're doing fine, but I miss restaurants. And so if I keep with that analogy for a second, how do you shop for what you want to eat? How do you explore on the web what's available to you? How do you make a reservation? How do you share your thoughts and feedbacks about your experience there? Same parallels are going to happen with offices. We're going to see facilities and real estate people begin to think more like marketers. Who are my customers? What are their demands? What's the product I'm offering, and how are we meeting it? And so certainly reservation tools, space booking tools, I think are very useful. More broadly, workplace experience applications that might have a new way of allowing facilities teams to communicate with their end users, indoor wayfinding, what's in the cafeteria, what are the gym hours, like all of these things are really useful. And I think we'll see some very significant improvements to building technology, specifically around indoor air quality. I mentioned CO2 earlier. Without getting too into the COVID thing, I think organizations have realized that indoor air transmission, or the aerosolization of the virus, was such a huge factor compared to things like surface transmission, which maybe weren't, that it's forced them to take a look at the quality of their air inside their buildings, which is long overdue. There's upgrades available for all sorts of building systems around not just air, but lighting and other environmental kind of qualities that I think will be really positive. So from a technology standpoint, it's those things that help to make the space desirable and usable, and help the people that design and run these spaces to understand the people they're serving better. And there's lots of platforms out there, just most organizations are in the very early stages of evaluating them.
Have you seen holograms yet?
Yeah, I have. You might be familiar with Gartner, the technology research firm. They have a report that comes out every year called the Hype Cycle. And the hype cycle tracks the development of new technologies. And in the early stages, it's like, okay, something came on the scene. And then the next stage they call the peak of inflated expectations, where the technology becomes more widely known and people are like, this is amazing. It's going to solve all of our needs. And then the very next phase of this, it's worth Googling, by the way, if you've never seen it, is called the trough of disillusionment, where people are like, oh, whatever happened to that? Like, it was supposed to solve all of our needs. And then over time, there's a slope towards commercialization. And Gartner basically suggests that almost any technology will go through these phases. I live in Michigan. here in Grand Rapids, I'm on the local mobility commission. We've got one of the most extensive autonomous vehicle pilots happening anywhere in the world. You can just jump into a self-driving car in downtown Grand Rapids for free if you want to. But if I think about autonomous vehicles as an example of being touted as everything for the future, they're kind of in that phase now where there's tremendous amounts of commercialization and engineering happening to work them out. Holography and holographic interaction between people, something that we've seen in sci-fi for years, which is usually an indication that somebody in the tech world is trying to make it happen. But I would say that with the exception of very specific use, specifically for major events, Coachella type events, it's got a long ways to go. I don't even think it's gotten near the peak of inflated expectations yet, but it is cool. And I have like this secret deep down desire to actually do this and be a holograph at some sort of event at someday. But I think we're in it for a long time. My favorite tech futurist, Paul Sappho, says, never mistake a clear view for a short distance. So if we agree that holograms might be part of our existence in some form or fashion, we shouldn't underestimate just how long it's going to take to get there.
Ryan, is there anything else you want the Six to know about you or Herman Miller?
Well, knowing that your listeners are largely in the world of corporate and commercial real estate, I'd just say this. Herman Miller's been thinking about how to support work wherever it happens for a really long time. I mean, part of it's because we have roots in residential furniture, but as we think about corporate office spaces, making them more desirable, increasing the utilization of them and expanding them over time, or we think about flexible workspace or home workspace, we've researched and worked to support all those environments. So even if as an organization, you might think, well, I'm not exactly sure what the future looks like that's the perfect conversation for us to have together, because throughout the years of researching it, we might be able to offer a few tips. We're never prescriptive in terms of what's right for an organization, but we've usually got some sort of insights that help people to come to that decision on their own.
Well, thank you, Ryan, for coming on the show and sharing your ideas. Keep up the good work.
Thank you, my friend. Appreciate it.